And it was a very exotic time. I mean, people were flying. People had never flown before. People were hiring cars. People were travelling to beautiful destinations. They were staying in exotic hotels. They were staying in hotels with bedrooms that had bathrooms. I mean, these are things that people just didn't do at home. And so how wonderful it was to be involved at that time of such change.
And so a little bit about airports then, and how people sort of... I mean, this was the first time a lot of people had actually walked through an airport.
Airports throughout the 60s and perhaps the early 70s too were very exotic places. You could be waiting for your flight home, for example, at Alicante Airport, and you could go out into the garden and take a drink and watch the airplanes and see the sunset. I mean, why would you want to go home when you were able to have that enjoyable experience? It's no longer an enjoyable experience if you're being delayed, but by God, at that time, well, why would you want to rush home? It was a very relaxed and very amiable time when people talked to each other, and the numbers that came throughout the 70s were not as great at that time.
What could you say the same for Luton? I mean, could you call it Luton an exotic experience? I suppose for a lot of people it would have been, though. I think
the great thing about an airport like Luton is that it was the first airport that anybody ever experienced. They'd never been to an airport before, and suddenly they were going to an airport where airplanes left from, and where you did things like go through passport control, and you checked in your luggage, and you were able to look at duty-free and take things with you, and it had that extraordinary appeal that perhaps is no longer the case, but at that time it was a very exotic thing to do.
Lovely. And so let's sort of drag it forward slightly to 73. And I mean, so what were you doing in 73? By 73 you joined full-time and you're...
Well, I'd spent 2 years at Clarkson's, and I worked in all sorts of areas.
By 97, sorry, if you can lead it with by 1973.
Okay.
Being very specific, I know, but
yes.
It gives me a good in.
Yes. I spent a couple of years working for one of the major tour operating companies, and I was involved as a graduate trainee in all aspects of that, including from complaints through to marketing, through to airport sales, and I was very much involved in the offices that the company set up at regional airports all over the country. And from there I moved on to the marketing side. And
sorry, because I would have to stop you. You said a major tour operator rather than Clarkson's at the beginning.
Yes.
So
what do you want me to do?
Could you say Clarkson's at the beginning? But by 1973,
I'm sorry. I thought you wanted me to keep up.
No. That was sorry, my fault.
I spent a couple of years working with Clarkson's, and that gave me the opportunity to experience several aspects of the company's business. I started as a graduate trainee, which took me into reservations, took me into complaints, it took me into sales and marketing, and I was involved then with the setting up of regional offices all over the country at the airports. The regional airports were becoming more important, and I then moved into the production of brochures themselves, so working on the winter sun products of the company.
And when was that? So you could just give me by 1973 I was working on.
By 73 I was working with the regional airports that were being set up throughout the country as sales offices, reservations offices, and at the end of 73 I was working on the summer and winter sun brochure production.
And so you were telling me about how people, I mean, this is just a slight aside, how picky people were about their regional airports. I thought was quite amusing. So tell me a little bit about that, because it's like that regional pride.
It was extraordinary how quickly people moved from the excitement of travel, and they would travel to London in order to go abroad, to insisting on departing from their regional airport. If you lived in Bristol, you would never consider flying, for example, from Cardiff, even though it was just a few miles away, and vice versa. People became very possessive about their local departure airports and very demanding, and it was up to tour operators to ensure that a full range of holidays was available from up to 9 different airports throughout the UK.
So what difficulties did that present you with?
The immediate problem was where we would put airplanes, because airplanes, of course, were not based in regional airports. So we'd have to send an airplane from Luton off to Palma, and then send the same airplane off to, say, Glasgow. Glasgow passengers would be picked up, off they go to Palma to pick up the people who are waiting to return to Luton. So this W formation was a classic opportunity. The problem arose, of course, that if you sold your Luton flights but not your Glasgow flights, or vice versa, how would you maintain your load factors to ensure the profitability of your operation?
So in more general terms, was 73 a bumpy year? The one, I mean, you said that you were by this time Clarksons are a major player. I mean, you were selling 1.1 million holidays by 73. I mean, it's quite a dramatic. I mean, Clarksons went from.
Do you want to talk about the problems in 73 at this point? Or?
No, just in terms of it was 73 was a good year by all accounts. I mean, the problems were on the horizon.
I will talk about losses, because 73 was a big loss year for Clarksons, even though it was a big year for passenger numbers.
Maybe that's the end thought. If we can talk about numbers have increased earlier, but and then just literally just a one sentence finish.
Okay.
Would be,
Okay.
Yeah, that's the pull the rug from under the feet, I suppose.
1973 was really an extraordinary year. More people travelled in 1973 than at any time in the history of aviation and the travel industry. People were very demanding. They wanted to go to all sorts of new destinations, but essentially they wanted to return with their families to the Spanish costas, and that build-up that had been taking place over the previous 5 years really came to a head in 1973. So in terms of passenger numbers, there'd never been such growth, but underneath was an underlying problem of profitability.
Can we do just a short break and do a quick lens change? I think we'll go. The sort of the opening gambit when we spoke earlier was use the pilot high, sell it cheap. And so if we just talk about that, and then I think what really illustrated when you told me about sort of the.
I haven't mentioned Tom Gullett yet, have I?
No.
Do you want me to mention him now?
No, I don't. I think because it introduces a character to the viewer who we have to explain who he is.
Right. Okay. But I could talk about the managing director of the company, or the philosophy of the company.
Yeah, I think it was just the ethos. Yes. And I think the point which you made, which illustrated really clearly for me, was so if there's a pilot high, sell it cheap, and everybody sort of gets that as a concept. Then we'll expand on what that means in hard terms. I think it's this concept of planes having to be 95% full. And if you've only got a 100-seat plane and you only sold 94 seats, it may be full, but you're
yes. So I'll talk about that aspect. You mean there were other aspects which you may or may not wish to talk to me about, and that is to do with the reason why companies had little profitability at that time, and that was because of money that they were investing in hotel beds, which was a hugely important aspect of the industry. They're lending money to the hotels. They're then guaranteeing the hotel beds for years. But the money that is coming in from the customers is going straight out to the hotels. And that was really what the two problems Clarksons had. Yes, that was the big problem. It was a computerized reservation system, and it was investing in hotels. They were the two big problems that Clarksons were affected by. And then, of course, again, just a bit of background. I'm sure you knew it already. But Clarksons went on to work with Courtline. Courtline provided Clarksons with the air seats. And it was then the realisation that Courtline had that without Clarksons there would be virtually no Courtline. I'm sure you got that anyway.
Then sort of almost after this, it's who were Courtline?
Yes.
And then Courtline were the charter air company.
That's right.
They realised why did Courtline buy Clarksons?
Yes. So do you want me to talk about?
So we go. Do
you want me to talk about those other aspects?
Let's talk about the business model first. And I've given you because you've. I mean, there were those three key phrases. Was the pilot high, sell it cheap, which really made him, and about planes being full, which I think we'll do as a separate sort of question. And I think your final point to me when we spoke before was it was a business model for the good times.
Yes.
Which it is. I mean, it is as much as hey, guess what?
Yeah.
Well, there's quite a bit of resonance with where we are at the moment. Are you happy? Yes. Sorry. So just to sort of tell me briefly what sort of business model was Clarksons?
Clarksons was a company that appreciated that in order to offer holidays prices that people would be prepared to pay, they had to bring the price down. So they had to bring the price of travel down, they had to bring the price of accommodation down, had to bring the price of the various services that were provided for in a package holiday. So they had to make arrangements with airlines to get very good flight costs, but then they would ensure that profitability came perhaps only once you sold the 95th seat on a 100 seater aircraft. This was a very important aspect. And throughout the early 1970s, Clarksons never failed to achieve that 95% load factor, so they were getting their load factor. But
it's a way of saying, sorry, just to interrupt
yes.
you. It's a way of saying that without saying load factor, because it's quite a technical.
Don't you think that's an important factor?
Is there a different way